July 1944, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Captain Sakai Oba stood with 3,000 Japanese soldiers in the darkness before dawn. They were the remnants of the Saipan garrison, approximately 30,000 soldiers 3 weeks ago. Now, only 3,000 remained. The battle was lost. The island was falling. But Japanese military doctrine didn't allow for surrender. It didn't allow for strategic retreat. It only allowed for one final option, the Banzai charge. Banzai, literally 10,000 years, was a battle cry wishing the emperor eternal life. But in military terms, a Banzai charge meant a suicidal mass infantry attack. No tactics, no strategy, just wave after wave of soldiers running directly at enemy positions, accepting death as inevitable and honorable. Captain Oba had his orders from Colonel Kiyoshi Ogawa, the garrison commander. At dawn, all remaining forces will conduct a Banzai charge against American positions. We will die honorably. We will take as many Americans with us as possible. There is no alternative. Long live the Emperor. The 3,000 soldiers prepared themselves. They fixed bayonets to their Arisaka rifles, removed rank insignia, so bodies couldn't be identified, wrote final letters to families, drank sake when available, most didn't have any, said prayers at makeshift shrines, accepted death as their immediate future. Some soldiers were genuine believers in Bushido warrior code. They embraced this final charge as the ultimate expression of loyalty. Death in service to the emperor was the highest honor. But others, probably most, were terrified. They didn't want to die. They didn't want to run into machine gun fire with no hope of survival. But they had no choice. Refusing meant execution by their own officers. Surrendering meant eternal shame for their families, so they prepared to die. Captain Oba looked at his men. Most were teenagers, 18, 19 years old, conscripts who'd been in the army for months, not years. They'd barely learned to fire their rifles before being sent to Saipan. Now they were being ordered to die in a charge that everyone knew was futile. But orders were orders. Obedience was absolute. Personal feelings were irrelevant. At 4:30 a.m., the Banzai charge began. 3,000 Japanese soldiers screamed "Banzai" and charged toward American lines. They ran in waves, no cover, no suppressing fire, no tactical coordination, just mass human assault. They expected to die. They accepted dying. What they didn't expect was how they would die. 2 miles behind the front lines, Lieutenant James O'Brien commanded a battery of 6 M101 105mm howitzers. His artillery unit was part of the 27th Infantry Division's fire support. At 4:25 a.m., James received a radio call from forward observers. Massive enemy movement detected. Sounds like thousands of troops preparing for assault, requesting fire mission. James immediately activated the artillery coordination system, the most sophisticated fire support network ever developed. The American artillery coordination system included 1. Forward observers, FOs. Soldiers positioned with frontline infantry, equipped with radios, trained to call in artillery strikes. 2. Fire direction centers, FDCs. Command posts with maps, calculation equipment and communication systems. 3. Artillery batteries, the actual guns, positioned miles behind lines, able to fire at targets they couldn't see. 4. Liaison network, radio communication between all units, allowing instant coordination. When the forward observer called in the fire mission, here's what happened in the next 3 minutes. 4:25 a.m. Forward observer reports enemy assembly area coordinates. 4:26 a.m. Fire Direction Center receives coordinates, calculates firing data, elevation, charge, fusing. 4:27 a.m. 6 howitzers receive firing instructions. 4:28 a.m. First ranging shot fired, observer corrects aim. 4:28 a.m. Fire for effect order given. All 6 guns begin sustained fire. By the time the Banzai charge began at 4:30 a.m., American artillery was already firing. But it wasn't just James's 6 guns. The coordination system allowed multiple artillery batteries to fire on the same target simultaneously. Within 5 minutes of the initial call, 18 artillery batteries, 108 guns total, were firing on the approaching Japanese charge. The forward observer, Sergeant Michael Torres, was positioned on a hill overlooking the battlefield. Through his binoculars in the pre-dawn darkness, he watched the Banzai charge begin. 3,000 Japanese soldiers screaming and running toward American positions. Then the artillery arrived. 108 howitzers firing high-explosive shells. Each shell contained several pounds of TNT and steel fragments. Each gun could fire 3 to 4 rounds per minute. That meant over 300 shells landing every minute in a target area, roughly 500 meters square. Michael had never seen anything like it. The entire battlefield erupted. Explosions created a wall of fire and steel. The ground itself seemed to explode. Trees disintegrated. Earth flew into the air. And human bodies, thousands of them, disappeared into the inferno. The Banzai charge lasted approximately 15 minutes. By the time it reached American defensive positions, maybe 300 soldiers remained from the original 3,000. The artillery had killed 90% of the attacking force before they ever reached their target. The remaining 300 were cut down by American machine gun and rifle fire within minutes. Total American casualties from the Banzai charge: 98 killed, 257 wounded. Total Japanese casualties: 3,000 killed. 100% fatality rate. The Saipan Banzai charge wasn't unique. Japanese forces conducted similar charges throughout the Pacific War, and American artillery destroyed them all with systematic efficiency. Key battles where Banzai charges were obliterated by artillery: Guadalcanal, October 1942. Japanese, 3,000 soldiers in Banzai charge. Result: 2,200 killed by artillery, 600 killed by direct fire, 200 wounded captured. American casualties: 80 killed Tarawa, November 1943. Japanese, 1,500 soldiers in final Banzai charge. Result: 1,400 killed by naval gunfire and artillery, 100 killed by infantry. American casualties: 45 killed Peleliu, November 1944. Japanese, 1,200 soldiers in Banzai charge. Result: 1,100 killed by artillery, 100 killed by infantry tank fire. American casualties: 52 killed Iwo Jima, March 1945. Multiple small Banzai charges, 300, 500 soldiers each. Result: 95% plus casualties from artillery before reaching American lines. Minimal American casualties. The pattern was consistent. Japanese forces would mass for Banzai charges, making themselves perfect artillery targets. American forward observers would call in fire missions. Multiple artillery batteries would coordinate fire on the same target. The charges would be destroyed before accomplishing anything. It was systematic slaughter, but it wasn't American cruelty. It was Japanese tactical suicide. A U.S. Marine Corps after-action report from Saipan stated, "Enemy Banzai charges represent the most ineffective tactical doctrine observed in this theater. Enemy forces mass in areas easily targeted by artillery, then advance in waves that present ideal targets for defensive fire. These charges achieve no tactical objectives while inflicting maximum casualties on enemy forces. If the enemy's goal is self-destruction, Banzai charges are highly effective. If the goal is military victory, they are catastrophically counterproductive." The mathematics were brutal. Average Japanese casualties per Banzai charge, 85–95%. Average American casualties, 2 to 5%. Tactical objectives achieved by Banzai charges: 0. Psychological impact on American forces: minimal. After the first few, Americans just called for artillery and waited. Japanese officers knew this. They weren't stupid. They understood that Banzai charges accomplished nothing militarily, but they conducted them anyway because Japanese military culture valued honorable death over tactical effectiveness. What made American artillery so devastatingly effective wasn't just the guns, it was the coordination system. Before World War II, artillery was line of sight. Guns fired at targets they could see. Coordination between units was minimal. Each battery operated independently. The U.S. Army revolutionized this system by developing 1. Forward observer system. Trained observers with radios positioned with infantry. They could see targets, call in coordinates, adjust fire in real time. This meant artillery could hit targets miles away with precision. 2. Fire direction centers. Dedicated command posts with trained personnel who could calculate firing data instantly, coordinate multiple batteries, manage ammunition supply, prioritize targets. Execute complex fire missions. 3. Time on target TOT artillery, the most revolutionary innovation. Multiple artillery batteries would calculate firing data so that all shells arrived at the target simultaneously, regardless of distance differences between guns and target. For example, Battery A is 3 miles from target, Battery B is 5 miles away, Battery C is 4 miles away. The FDC calculates when each battery must fire, so all shells arrive at exactly the same moment. The result? Instead of shells arriving over several minutes, dozens or hundreds of shells arrive in the same second, creating devastating simultaneous explosions that gave enemies no time to take cover. TOT artillery was used extensively against Banzai charges. Forward observers would identify the Japanese assembly area. Multiple batteries would prepare TOT fire missions. When the charge began, all batteries fired simultaneously. The first shells would arrive just as Japanese soldiers committed to the attack, too late to retreat, too early to reach American lines. Perfect timing for maximum destruction. Japanese forces had no equivalent system. Japanese artillery was poorly coordinated, each battery operated independently, limited ammunition, supply problems meant rationed fire, no forward observer network, limited ability to hit unseen targets, outdated doctrine, World War I tactics. When Japanese artillery fired, it was scattered, uncoordinated, and ineffective. When American artillery fired, it was concentrated, coordinated, and devastating. The difference showed in casualty statistics. American artillery killed more Japanese soldiers than any other weapon system. Estimated 30–40% of all Japanese combat deaths were from artillery fire. Captain Sakai Oba survived the Saipan Banzai charge. He was one of maybe 50 survivors from the 3,000 who charged. He survived only because he was knocked unconscious by a shell explosion early in the charge. When he woke hours later, the battle was over. He hid in the jungle and continued guerrilla warfare until December 1945, 4 months after Japan surrendered. After the war, Oba was interviewed extensively about his experiences. When asked about the Banzai charge, he said, "We knew it was suicide. Everyone knew, but our doctrine demanded it. We'd rather die attacking than surrender. That was the belief. But when the American artillery started, it wasn't battle. It wasn't combat. It was industrial execution. Shells arrived like rain, like a storm of steel and fire. Men disappeared, vaporized. I saw 100 soldiers running beside me, then an explosion, then they were gone. All of them, just gone. American artillery didn't fight us. It erased us. There's a difference. Fighting implies both sides have a chance. We had no chance. From the moment we began charging, we were dead. The artillery just formalized it." When asked if he thought Banzai charges were militarily effective, Oba laughed bitterly. "Effective? No. We accomplished nothing. We killed perhaps 100 Americans at the cost of 3,000 Japanese. That's not warfare. That's mass suicide. But we were ordered to do it, and we obeyed, because that's what Japanese soldiers did, obey until death." American soldiers who witnessed Banzai charges had different perspectives. Most felt it was pointless and sad. Sergeant Michael Torres, the forward observer, said in a 1987 interview, "The first Banzai charge I saw, I was terrified. Thousands of enemy soldiers screaming and charging. It seemed overwhelming, but then our artillery opened up and it was over. Just over. They were dead before they reached us. After that, Banzai charges weren't scary. They were predictable. They'd mass. We'd call artillery, they'd die, every time, same result. What bothered me wasn't the killing, it was the waste. These were soldiers, mostly kids, being ordered to commit suicide for no military purpose. We weren't defeating them in battle. We were executing them while they followed suicidal orders. That's not something to feel proud about, it's something to feel sad about." After the war, military historians studied Banzai charges extensively. The consensus, they were the worst tactical doctrine of World War II. Why Banzai charges failed? 1. Predictable, always a direct frontal assault. 2. Easily targeted. Mass formations were perfect for artillery. 3. No tactical flexibility, once started, couldn't adapt. 4. No objective beyond death, didn't try to accomplish anything except dying honorably. 5. Played directly into American strengths, artillery, and defensive firepower. What Japanese forces should have done? 1. Guerrilla warfare, use jungle terrain for ambushes. 2. Infiltration tactics, small unit attacks at night. 3. Defensive warfare, fortified positions were hard for Americans to assault. 4. Strategic withdrawal, preserve forces for defense of home islands. Some Japanese commanders did use these tactics effectively. Colonel Takeshi Takashina on Guam used defensive warfare and inflicted heavy American casualties before being killed. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi on Iwo Jima forbade Banzai charges and instead fought a defensive battle that caused 26,000 American casualties. But most commanders followed traditional doctrine. When defeat was certain, conduct a Banzai charge, die honorably, achieve nothing. American artillery ensured that approach accomplished exactly nothing, except creating mass graves. Today, military academies study Banzai charges as examples of how doctrine can override common sense, how cultural values can produce catastrophically bad tactics, how courage without strategy is just organized suicide. The lesson is clear. Bravery doesn't win battles. Strategy wins battles. Coordination wins battles. Effective use of technology wins battles. Japanese soldiers were brave, incredibly brave. They charged into certain death without hesitation. That's courage. But American soldiers had artillery coordination. And in modern warfare, coordination beats courage. Every single time. Japanese Banzai charges were obliterated by American artillery coordination. Not because Americans were better warriors, but because Americans had better systems. And systems, cold, mechanical, efficient systems, killed brave soldiers by the thousands while barely suffering casualties in return. That's the reality of modern warfare. Honor and courage matter, but logistics, coordination, and firepower matter more. Japan learned that lesson in blood, 3,000 soldiers at a time, charging into artillery fire, dying for nothing. The Banzai charges didn't weaken America. They weakened Japan. They killed experienced soldiers who could have been used for defense. They boosted American morale by showing that Japanese tactics were suicidal. By war's end, Japanese commanders mostly stopped ordering Banzai charges. They'd learned, too late, but they'd learned. The lesson: never charge artillery positions. Never mass troops in areas observable by enemy forward observers. Never follow tactical doctrine that prioritizes honor over effectiveness. American artillery coordination taught Japan these lessons. With approximately 100,000 Japanese soldiers killed in Banzai charges across the Pacific War. That's the cost of refusing to adapt, of valuing tradition over practicality, of choosing death with honor over life with wisdom. Banzai charges were obliterated by American artillery, and with them, any chance Japan had of winning the Pacific War.